The first reading is from the 17th chapter of Acts. Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship is unknown. This I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him. Though indeed he is not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead." The word of the Lord. So suddenly, we are all living in a new normal. Now, I know a lot of people have been talking about what the new normal is going to look like once we get beyond this pandemic. But even though that normal will also be new, we are living in a new normal right now. And the new normal right now has taken some adjusting. And frankly, most of the adjusting, it's been irritating. The new normal we've got right now is a normal where we all need to stay 6 feet apart from each other and wear masks. Where we need to stand in line just to be admitted to the grocery store. And where we continue to be able to worship and meet with our friends online. And part of what makes this new normal so hard is that, like so many other new normals that we have faced before, it seems to have suddenly come upon us without warning. Like other new normals, it's not clear what parts will become permanent. And because so much of the new normal is difficult and frankly just a pain, it's often hard to see any good that's going to come out of it. So today, I thought I would unpack the first reading a little bit and point out that Paul, in this reading, has also suddenly been thrust into a new normal in his life and in his ministry. Prior to today's reading, Paul has arrived in Greece for the first time. He had seen a vision and decided that because of this vision, Jesus wanted him to go and preach to people in Greece. So Paul and his companions got on a boat and they traveled from what is today Turkey over to Greece, but they largely did what they had been doing before. They went to communities of Jews and Paul taught in the synagogues. Sometimes it went well, sometimes it didn't. But that was just like it had always been. However, on the last stop, right before this reading, Paul and his companions had gotten themselves into such an uproar that Paul was forced to flee quite a bit south to Athens, which is notable because it's one of the few places that Paul visits that you've actually heard of. And Paul was left in Athens alone as he waited for his companions to catch up with him. Suddenly, Paul found himself in the midst of a new normal. Here in Athens, which was not a familiar place to Paul, Paul found himself in a situation in which he had to go it alone for a while. None of his companions were there to help him or even to give him moral support. So he was on his own. Here in Athens, this new normal meant that Paul was going to need to talk to people about Jesus outside of a synagogue. The Areopagus is this hill, and it's outside of, it's about halfway between what is still today the downtown part of Athens and the Acropolis, which is the big place that has the temple and everything up there. And you get a great view, and people climate still today. I did when I was there on sabbatical. Because you get a great view, and it was a place where people gathered, and they had all kinds of conversation about all kinds of things. It was a great big party place, but it was not necessarily a place where people expected to debate religion. And this is now where Paul was going to have to talk about Jesus. And that meant that Paul, in this new normal, was going to have to share his faith without anybody knowing the context of Judaism. You know, in the synagogue, whenever Paul entered there, everybody shared a common Bible. And they shared a common understanding of God, not the least of which was there is one God, only one God, whereas the Greeks thought there were tons and all kinds of gods. So what Paul was doing here really probably felt just like he was winging it. Honestly, if I were Paul, I would have been tempted to lay low, wait for support, and find a situation that frankly felt more comfortable and familiar. But Paul is kind of weird, and apparently, even in this new normal, Paul saw opportunity. He must have figured that if Jesus wanted him in Greece, maybe Jesus was giving him a new opportunity to reach Gentiles who didn't know anything about the God of Israel. And he ended up at the Areopagus and thought, maybe this is the opportunity that God is putting in front of me right now. Apparently, even in this new normal, Paul felt that God was with him, empowering him to act even if he didn't have his usual companions there to help him. I mean, a lot of times we get used to our moral support. We've got our friends around, we've got people around, but apparently Paul still felt that God was with him, that Jesus was empowering him, even though, to look around, he was all alone. And apparently, even in this new normal, Paul was literally willing to go outside of his comfort zone and not let the difficulty of the moment cause him to duck and cover and wait for all of this to be over. Because he could have walked around Athens and gotten to the Areopagus and thought, what a bunch of pagans these are, I'm going to go hide out someplace and wait. But he didn't. And it seems, from the story of Acts, that this time in Athens, this new normal, was a transition point for Paul. This was really the moment when Paul began to reach out to Gentiles as a major emphasis of his ministry. Paul began to consider ways to reach people who had not heard about the God of Israel. And Paul began to be maybe a little bit more bold in going to places that he had not gone before. Now, it's not clear that it was ever part of God's plan for Paul to flee to Athens and suddenly find himself in this new normal situation. But it is clear that God used that moment in Paul's life to make Jesus known in new ways, both to Paul and to others. So even though I am annoyed at much of the new normal that we are going through right now, it also occurs to me that God can use this new normal in my life and in yours when we're willing, like Paul, to be open to new opportunities that may have been forced upon us by this new normal. As we're seeing right now, as we began putting all of these opportunities online for worship and Wednesday evening and Monday evening and Friday evening, I remember beginning thinking, I don't know if anybody's going to log on and watch this stuff. And we're finding all kinds of people who otherwise were not able to connect with us now do. And there's opportunity that God is giving us, even in the midst of this annoying new normal, to be able to reach out and connect with people and share God's love in ways that, frankly, we probably wouldn't have tried if it weren't for this situation. And also, if you're like me, you may have been connected to some other people that you haven't seen in years because suddenly, we all got the time and we had the tools before, but now we're hanging out with people on Zoom and Google Hangouts. I have seen and connected with people and talked to people I haven't seen in years because of this new normal. We have opportunities, even though there's all this other annoying stuff that goes along with it. God can use this moment in our lives, this new normal, for as annoying as it is, when you and I are also willing to be people who are open to feeling Jesus' presence in ways that maybe we didn't when we were so distracted by everything else going on in our lives. You know, sometimes we don't stop and listen for God until we're forced to, or forced in a new way. I get, and maybe you do too, kind of sucked into my own religious routine, and this is how I feel God, this is how I experience God, and when it all stops, I wonder, is God still there? How do I hear and listen for God? And I've been experiencing that in my life, and I hope you have too. I mean, just as Paul was used to experiencing God working through his companions, but then they weren't there. Somehow he still was able to know that God was with him, even in the midst of that. And I hope as this new normal turns into the next new normal and the next new normal, we get a deeper sense of God's abiding presence with us, no matter what normal looks like in our lives. And it's the case that God will be using this new normal and the ones that come after it to help us whenever we're willing to try some new things. Whether it's a new hobby or learning to do things that we were never willing to try before, or even to pick up on things that we knew we could have used or done, but we just didn't. I've been watching all kinds of things on Facebook, you probably have too, about people who said, I tried baking this thing, or I tried this new hobby, or I tried something else because I had the time, and I experienced and learned something. I've learned that I can do things that I did not want to ever try before, and I won't continue to do. I mean, I realized I can actually trim my hair. It's not good, but it's okay, you know. But I've learned things about myself, and I've learned new skills, and I've learned to take things opportunities that theoretically I had before, but I never actually used. So, theoretically, we could have done online worship before now. It's so easy now with a Facebook page and an iPhone, you can do it. Again, not too well, but you can do it. And this is the thing that made us take technology we already had and say, how can we try this new thing? That's actually what Paul was doing. He was not only a student of the Torah and understood everything about God and Judaism, he was also somebody who was familiar with all the Greek philosophers. So when he got into that place in front of the Areopagus, he started to talk about pagan philosophers and poets. All that stuff is quoted from pagan philosophers because people understood that. And that was a way that he could take what he knew about Greek poetry and philosophy and help connect people to Jesus. So how do we take these skills and opportunities that we've had now and use them going forward in our lives? You know, eventually, Paul's new normal in Athens changed into a different kind of normal. Some things did return as they were before. Paul's companions eventually rejoined him, and he did still talk to other Jews in the synagogues. But the next new normal was different, as he lived and moved in different ways because of the experience he had in Athens. And for as crazy and difficult as our new normal is, I am sure that it will change. And it's probably going to change in another few weeks or so whenever we get out of the stay-at-home order, but it'll be a different kind of new normal. And in fact, it will develop into several new normals over the coming months. And eventually, I am absolutely certain that we are going to get to the point where we will actually gather in large groups again. And we will shake hands with one another, and we will see each other's faces without masks. But as we live through this new normal, and the new normals that follow, Paul's example in Athens is a good one for us. For like Paul, no matter how suddenly we get thrust into a new normal, and no matter how much of a pain it is to adapt, God will always use the next new normal. God will use this new normal and the next new normal, like in Athens, to give us new opportunities to connect with new people and to connect in different ways. God will use this new normal and the next to help us feel His presence and His help in our lives. And God will use this new normal and the next to show us ways to grow and adapt so that we have new tools and new skills to live faithfully into the future.